Those were the words of Jean-Marie Leblanc, director of the Tour de France, just a few hours ago as the route of the 91st Tour de France was unveiled in Paris. Hi, everybody, and welcome to OLN's Tour Route Announcement Show. I'm Kirstin Gum, joined by none other than Phil Liggett and Bob Roll. Are you guys ready for another Tour de France?
101st year, we're very excited. I've seen most of them.
I know you have. I know you have. I wasn't going to bring that up.
Thank you very much, Kirsten.
I'm ready like a senator in a cat house. I'm ready to go. It's going to be good.
Oh, my. It is hard to believe that we are going to be back in France in a little over than 8 months. Actually, our other teammate, Paul Sherwen, is in Paris, where apparently it's been a bit chilly. Paul?
Yes, Kirsten, I am in the very heart of Paris, and no, it is not as warm as it was 3 months ago when we were here for the finish of the Tour de France, but the temperatures were slightly warmer a few moments ago in the Palais de Congrès behind me, where Jean-Marie Leblanc and the Society Tour de France announced the route for the 2004 Tour de France. I tell you what, though, they have once again managed to come up with a very interesting twist with the inclusion of one of the Tour's favourite high spots. Yes, it's all to do with the mountain, but I tell you what, it's a rather strange way which we'll be going up it this time. It's also a time for many of the big stars to make the rendezvous and come and see what they're going to be up against next year when they go down to the Tour de France in July. Alexander Vinokourov had a chance to meet his new teammate for next season, Jan Ullrich, and on the other side, Lance Armstrong, who actually gave his first impressions of this tour route, and we'll get back to that a little bit later in the show. But for the moment, from a very cold Paris, it's back to you guys in the studio.
All right, thank you, Paul, and please keep warm in Paris. So, of course, we will have plenty more from Paul as we go through the show. As he hinted, there are a few surprises on the road. Let's go ahead and take a quick look at the stats for next year's tour, just unveiled earlier today. 21 stages for a total of 3,395 kilometers. That is just over 2,100 miles. The course alternates directions each year, part of the tradition of the tour, going counterclockwise in 2004, hitting the Pyrenees first. Here's the nitty-gritty, though. Early features include the Mer de Huy on stage 1, finishes at La Mongie and Plateau de Bay in the Pyrenees, and a time trialing challenge made all the more even with the addition of a mountain time trial up, guess where? None other than Alpe d'Huez and its 21 hairpin turns. Cannot wait for that. Well, that is a quick overview, but plenty more to talk about. Phil, we have known for a while that the race would start in Belgium, in the city of Liège, but why don't you take us through week 1 in more detail? It does look like it usually does. Tradition has it. It's usually a flat week for the sprinters, but there's a catch this year.
There is a catch. Very hard first stage as we ride away from the Belgian Ardennes because we climb the Mer de Huy, as Kirsten has said. But this race up in the north of Belgium is going to be a marvellous session for the fans because they will crowd in the tens of thousands here to watch the riders. They've had a winner in Johan Bruneel in Liège before. In Charleroi, we had Eric Zabel win on his birthday a few years back. They'll have climbed the Mer de Huy. Remember, the first team time trial comes after Namur. It's on stage 4. Just after we cross the border, we get down to Wascal, which is just over the border in France. Then Cambrai to Arras is the team time trial, which is where we should see some of the riders who fancy their chances getting to the top of the overall classification. As we race on through Chartres, it stays mainly flat and undulating. Good chance of little breakaways that might snip a few seconds and hold the race lead for a short while, but by the time we get to Quimper, Phil Anderson once won at Quimper in the Motorola colours, and Sambrier there, well, Jackie Duron won there once the prologue time trial and kept the lead for a while because it was atrocious conditions. He was an early starter, the rest fell off.
Well, and there may be quite a few climbs in Belgium, but typically a flat week.
Yeah, basically a flat week. The Ardennes are always hard, though, and the weather can be bad up there.
And it doesn't mean rest for the riders, does it, Bob? Because in stage 4, we have a team time trial, and we know what that means.
Yes, absolutely. No rest for the wicked in the team time trial. One of the most critical parts of the GC battle early on in the Tour de France. U.S. Postal winning last year, a big advantage over Jan Ullrich's team Bianchi. Lance Armstrong able to put a lot of time into Jan Ullrich right off the bat in the Tour. They beat this team, also the Once squad, who are one of the powerhouses traditionally in team time trialing. They, of course, have lost their sponsorship. Once no more as of next year, so it'll be an interesting battle. And also Ullrich has signed again with Telecom, a very strong team as well. So a huge battle in the first week on stage number 4 in the team time trial, just to see what the GC picture will look like as we get into the Pyrenees.
It'll be very, very interesting. And the team time trial, it will provide the first reality check for the overall classification just 5 days into the race, and that will be a key stage for the Postal team and Lance Armstrong. Paul Sherwen caught up with Lance after the announcement to get his reaction. Paul?
Thanks, Kirstin. Lance, first look at the Tour de France for next year. It does look rather complicated.
Obviously, it changes every year, and it has new twists and new challenges, but at the same time, they can't help but recycle some things. If you consider the Pyrenees, you do La Mongie and Plateau de Bay, which is basically what we did a couple of years ago. The Alps are very unique and different in that obviously we have an uphill time trial at Alpe d'Huez, which I don't think anybody really ever thought of, but it's an obvious choice actually. And then other places that I've certainly never seen before, and we'll have to devote significant time going there and figuring it out. But it's a tough tour.
Of course, more from Paul and Lance Armstrong later on in the show. Coming up, Lance won there in '95. Limoges and the Massif Central are next, and the Pyrenees beckon. Hi, and welcome back to OLN's 2004 Tour de France route announcement. I'm Kirstin Gum, joined by cycling experts Phil Liggett and Bob Roll. So 4 days in Belgium, a team time trial, a sprint to the northwest, and Brittany, Bob, that pretty much wraps up week one. Go ahead and take us into week two.
Well, week two will start with a rest day for the riders. They will fly to the Limoges. Of course, the journalists will be in clapped out Peugeots sprinting across France in cars. We'll go down to the longest stage of the tour, and that's into Saint-Flour, 237 kilometers. These roads in the Massif Central are by no means flat. They're very undulating, lots of hills, not mountainous, but very difficult for the riders. Plenty of more chances for the sprinters, and we get to the mountains in the Pyrenees a little bit late in this Tour de France, up to La Mongie. That will be a big stage for Lance Armstrong. And then the dreaded stage in the Pyrenees to the Plateau de Bay, very difficult. Sweep down towards the Mediterranean, Carcassonne, and that will be some good hard racing as well as we get to the second rest day at the end of the second week of bike racing, but big stages in the Pyrenees.
All right, let's go ahead and go back to stage 12, because this year the peloton went up over the Tourmalet and onto Les Ardidans. I don't think anybody will ever forget that stage. But in 2004, we only go halfway up the Tourmalet to La Mongie, and as you mentioned, that is a great spot for Lance Armstrong. In 2002, a stage win and in yellow?
Yes, absolutely. Lance Armstrong getting the yellow jersey after the stage up to La Mongie. Didn't plan the attack there, but Roberto Heras found himself with Lance Armstrong ahead of Yoshiba Boloki, who so tragically crashed out of the Tour de France in 2003. This was a great day for the U.S. Postal Riders. I think that Lance wanted to set it up for Heras so he could get a stage win, but Boloki was a little bit too strong, so Lance had to go ahead and leave him and won the stage and got the yellow jersey, kept that all the way to Paris for his fourth Tour de France win.
And stage 13, Phil, I mean, this course is starting to look like it was custom made for Lance. Of course, it was not, but stage 13, Plateau de Bay, another great Lance hotspot.
Yeah, and what Lance has already told us is this is a very familiar route as far as the Pyrenees is concerned. When you've won both top stages in previous years, after 2002 when Lance triumphed on these two very stages, he's got all the confidence he needs now to go for that sixth Tour win. This is where he practiced his new fast pedalling style, and this is where he put it to great effect. He wrote off the opposition, he consolidated his yellow jersey, and of course he left nobody in any doubt that from this moment on he was going to win the Tour de France that year.
And Armstrong and his Postal team have to be very happy with the parcours so far. Paul Sherwen caught up with the Postal team director, Johan Bruneel, at the announcement in Paris. Paul?
Johan Bruneel, you are the mastermind behind Lance's victories. You're the man who has to think about the tactical approach to this race. What are your first thoughts?
I think the mountains come pretty late, and we have the first 8 days, a lot of flat stages, where, as you say, the team is very important.
Last year, the team won the team time trial. If you get the lead early on, would you actually relinquish the lead because you'll need a strong team in the last week of racing?
The team time trial, you cannot think about, you cannot calculate. Every bonus is necessary. And even if we win the team time trial, I hope we can do it again like this year. If somebody gets in the jersey, maybe not, because maybe there has been a breakaway before. But anyway, that's not important. Who has the leader's jersey after the team time trial is not the most important.
That time trial to the summit of Alpe d'Huez has taken one or two people by surprise, but with due reflection, Lance seemed to warm to the idea.
We all know who his main rival is, Ulrich, and we know he's a strong time trialist. I think they're more or less the same when they're in top shape. And I think that an uphill time trial is an advantage for Lance, and definitely an Alpe d'Huez. It's a stage where he always has taken advantage on Ulrich. So I think for his head, it's good that the first time trial is an uphill time trial on Alpe d'Huez.
Johan, thanks very much for your thoughts. Kirstin, back to you.
Paul, thank you. Well, that is what Armstrong's director thought. What about the man himself? Remember, he will attempt a new record in 2004. No one has ever managed to win a 6th title. Here's Paul with Lance once again.
It's also going to be very difficult in the last week of racing because it seems to me that a lot of the mountains are concentrated in that 3rd week.
Similar to 2 years ago. As I said, I mean, they can't help but recycle sometimes. 2 years ago, we did La Mongie and Plateau de Bay, and they had the mountains right up to the finish. So it's the Tour. I mean, it's hard. It has everything, and normally, hopefully, and usually, the best man wins. So maybe that's me.
Paul, thank you. Still more of that interview to come. Plus, one of the hardest final weeks of the Tour ever, including a race against the clock on one of the Tour's most legendary climbs. Hello again, and welcome back to the 2004 Tour route announcement here on OLN. I'm Kirstin Gum, bringing you the route along with cycling experts Phil Liggett and Bob Roll. And once again, it is time to catch up with Paul Sherwen, who is in Paris and has more reaction from the man going for number 6, Lance Armstrong.
I think this year you'll spend a lot of time looking at the Alpe d'Huez.
Yeah, that's obvious. In fact, I think Johan has the call into the real estate agent. We have actually a house now in Alpe d'Huez. We just bought it 5 minutes ago.
That's a good thing because I think that's going to be pretty important.
It'll be important, and Alpe d'Huez is, the good thing about Alpe d'Huez is that you can actually, if you want to just go there and study that, you can even go earlier in the year when it's not necessarily warm, because it's not a pass and you don't have to worry about the roads being closed or the roads being blocked. So, I suspect we could even go there in April if you wanted. You'd be cold, but at least you could get up and see it and ride it a few times.
Can you win it for a 6th time?
No, I don't think I can make it.
So we shall all go home. Let's go.
No, let's go. Go on. Hey, I think I think the team is the secure thing here. I have to be the leader and be a strong and worthy leader, and I firmly believe we have the best team in the world, and I hope that I can correct the mistakes that I made this year and come back and win another Tour. Not necessarily trying to win number 6, but just trying to win the Tour. I mean, it's everything to me and everything to the team, and quite frankly, it's everything that cycling means in America.
You keep bringing up the mistakes from last year, but you've never actually told us what they were.
A lot of little mistakes, so it would be boring to go into detail on the little things, but if you start talking about something like this and you add in bad luck, you add in getting older, you add in hot weather, and these things, you can't afford to have mistakes or make little mistakes, and we'll try to correct them, and I hope that, I'm certainly not getting younger, so I have to look for every other advantage. And anyways, I like the course. I think the uphill time trial suits me, I hope. I think.
Thanks, Lance, for taking the time to join us. Kirstin?
All right, thank you, Paul.
He's confident, isn't he?
Yes, he is.
Another house he's got now as well.
Another house, just what he needs. I wouldn't pick Alpe d'Huez to put a house on, that's for sure. All right, so we are 2 weeks in, and in 2004, Phil, the Alps seem to pack a cruel punch. All that comes to mind is suffer, suffer, and then suffer some more.
Yeah, I think in this year, particularly in this year, Lance Armstrong's going to have a real tough job to win this race. And we're going to see a lot of riders challenging. But this last week is vicious as we start our journey right at the base of the Alps into the Vercors at Villard-de-Lans. 5 cols on the menu that day, the same as we go on towards Alpe d'Huez. Then, of course, the climb of the Alp itself, which is a time trial this time around. There'll be thousands of people watching a full day of activity here. Onto the Grand Beaumont, 5 more cols. Onto the borders of Switzerland at Annemasse, still on the French side, of course, and an undulating route to Lens at Les Saunières. And then, thankfully to the riders, they'll be away from the big mountains. But of course, then we have the individual time trial at Besançon before we make our journey by train, traditionally on the last weekend, heading up towards the final stage into Paris. And by this stage, of course, we will know who is going to win the race. This will be the traditional end that Lance Armstrong has known for the last 5 years when he's raced into Paris wearing the maillot jaune. The question is, of course, will he still be having it when he gets there this time? And if he is, of course, he'll be the first man to do that.
Now we have to go back to stage 16 and the mountain time trial up Alpe d'Huez. I mean, what a combination. How tough is it going to be? We've heard from both Johan and Lance say it's going to be a very important and crucial moment, but how tough, and who will emerge victorious?
Well, really, this will be the great day of the Tour de France. There'll be thousands and thousands of people who line Alpe d'Huez waiting for the time trial. And the last man to go, we hope, will be Lance Armstrong in the maillot jaune of the day. But who knows? Fausto Coppi was the first winner when this climb was first introduced in 1952. And since then, Armstrong himself has known what it's like to win up here. But this is a time trial. It's a race of truth, and it'll be an incredible battle. I can really believe it should decide the Tour, of course, but you never know. But Armstrong will be up for it because he loves this sort of a ride.
Yes, he does. Well, and the mountain time trial, Bob, I mean, it's just one of 4 very tough days in the last 6. What else do you think we'll see in the Alps?
Well, we're going to have a very difficult climb up to Villard-de-Lans. There's very hard climbs along that. The Glandon and the Madeleine, very difficult. Then, of course, there's a time trial up to Alpe d'Huez. And Le Grand Bernard comes after that in a very difficult 60-kilometer flat time trial. All 4 days, very difficult in a row. But I think the time trial up to Alpe d'Huez is going to be very hard. If we cast our mind back a couple years ago to 01, Lance played his great game of poker there. He was bluffing throughout that stage, sitting on the back of the train led by Ulrich's team, the telecom team. Once they got to Alpe d'Huez, the last climb of the day, he lit the race up, won the stage, took a lot of time out of Simon, who was leading then. It was a great day, one of my favorite all-time days of the Tour since Lance began his reign of 5 victories in a row now, going for number 6.
He likes mind games, head games a little bit.
That day he did. Usually he just likes to kill everybody, but on that day it was good. He really played it really well.
Well, so 2 things are for sure: the route of the Tour, and that more leading contenders have changed teams than ever before. It just makes the guessing game even harder. Coming up, Phil, Paul, and Bob give us predictions and final thoughts. Welcome to our final look at today's 2004 Tour route announcement. I'm Kirstin Gum with OLN's panel of cycling experts, Phil Liggett, Bob Roll, and Paul Sherwen. Paul, obviously not here in the studio with us, but I believe he is on the end of a satellite link right now from Paris. Paul, we'd like your final thoughts.
You know, Kirstin, it's very difficult to analyze the Tour de France quite as quickly as we have done in the last few moments. And I know a lot of team managers will be looking at that map very intently this evening, including Johan Brunel, who told us he'd got the big lines, but what he has to do now is fit in the intimate details. And that's going to be a very interesting plan that he has to work out over the next few months. Armstrong, an interesting character. He never gives very much away, but there was a twinkle in his eye when he talked about the Alpe d'Huez and the inclusion of that great monument as an individual time trial. Whether or not he wins the Tour de France for a 6th time, we won't know. But I hope you're going to be with us in 9 months' time when we're on the other side of the Arc de Triomphe there, because that's where we'll know whether Mr. Armstrong can win it for the 6th time in succession.
All right, thank you, Paul. Okay, Phil, we know the race has to hit the Pyrenees. It has to hit the Alps. It has to finish in Paris. What do you think of the 2004 route?
Well, we also know that Paul Sherwen's hedging his bets. He's not told us who's going to win, has he? It should be a great race for Lance Armstrong, and I always say if he comes to the start line, he believes he can win that Tour. I think he'll be heavily challenged this year. It's important to note, though, there are changes this year in the way the teams are selected. The first 14 teams in the UCI World Rankings at the start of the year, automatic. So Lance Armstrong's team's in, so that's a bit of a relief, really. And the other 8 teams which come as wild cards, the organisation will select. But unlike last year, they'll do it by the end of March, which means, of course, that we'll know all of the teams and that all these races leading up to the Tour will not be seen as preparation races to try and make the last team position. I think that's important. And I'll tell you what, Bob, if Alejandro Valverde rides, he's had such a marvellous end of season with his 3rd place in the Tour of Spain and, of course, his World Championship medal. He'd be a real challenge.
Oh, absolutely. Kelme also losing Sevilla to the Phonak team in the off-season. He'll join Tyler Hamilton over there. Very powerful. So Valverde might have to step up for the Kelme team. They're always competitive in the Grand Tours. Jan Ullrich, of course, will be back. He's desperate to win again. He's won way back in 1997. Hasn't been able to replicate that. But if you bet against Lance Armstrong, you're going to have to ask yourself one question, and is that if you feel lucky, punk?
We will have to wait and see. So the 2004 Tour, just a little over 8 months away. Some fantastic racing promised. We leave you with a look at the entire route. I'm Kirstin Gum with Phil Liggett, Bob Roll, and Paul Sherwen. Thank you for watching.